gospel tonight, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and we are in John. I'm going to jump in really quick, just a little bit of background information, and then I'll give you the layout of what we want to do tonight, what we're going to do tonight. So just a few important topics for John, or items for John. It's pretty much obvious that John wrote the book. Historians never doubted it. Lots of major historians, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, all the guys were like, yeah, John wrote it. It's John. It was probably written mid AD or mid 80s, AD, or even later. There's a little bit of sort of recent scholars that maybe thought it was a really early book, but most people believe it's more like late 80s, early 90s for a couple of reasons. One, it's a little bit more developed of a theology than some of the other gospels. And then maybe even more significant is that was sort of the rise of Gnosticism, this idea of secret knowledge, and knowledge is what we're attaining for and what we're going after. And you see John both in the book of John and in 1st and 2nd John tackling Gnosticism in a little different ways. And we'll look really quick before we get going at John 1, and I'll show you a little bit even of how John was trying to address Gnosticism even at the beginning of the book. So I would say mid 80s, late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there. The church was a mix of Gentiles and maybe 2nd and 3rd generation Christians. There was definitely, like I said, Gnosticism and other false teaching. John would have been a really respected elder in the structure of the church and would have taken it really seriously to combat this false teaching. One guy in particular, his name was Cerinthus, Cerinthus, Cerinthus. And he contended that Jesus was merely a human personality, that he was possessed by the Christ, which is an interesting thought. Never heard that one before. That he was possessed by the Christ spirit at his baptism, and then he relinquished his spirit on the cross. That was Cerinthus's view of Jesus, that he was a spirit, or possessed by the spirit of Christ. That happened to him at baptism, and then he relinquished that spirit at the cross. That was his philosophy. So, anything else? I'm going to hold off on the main idea till the end. But let's look at John 1, because I think that's going to give us a little bit more insight into some of the false teaching that John was dealing with, and specifically Cerinthus. So I'm going to read John 1 a little bit up to maybe 14, verse 14. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came for testimony to bear witness to the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness to the light. The true light that enlightens every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world knew him not. He came to his own home, and his own people received him not. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of men, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We have beheld his glory as of the only Son from the Father." And I'll stop there. So there's a lot of things here, right? So look, the word logos, it has this inference of this phrase, for the reason why, or for everything. Even philosophers sort of would deal with this and talk about this. And it's as if John is trying to say Jesus is the reason why. Jesus is the everything. you already have some of this light and darkness contrast, and he begins to talk about this imagery of light right away. I think a lot of that has to do too with the Gnosticism. He purposely in verse 6 says John came from God, meaning John the Baptist, because there was some of the false teachers were proclaiming John wasn't legit, like John didn't come from God. And so he's refuting that lie right there in verse 6. This idea of a true light, false light, that's all Gnosticism imagery. Those are all terms that, we're trying to find the light, find the secret knowledge. These are all the types of phrases that a Gnostic would talk about or attain to, sort of connected to their salvation, what they would understand to be their salvation, secret enlightenment. So, and then he says in verse 14, the word became flesh, dwelt among them. Okay, so that what a lot of the false teaching didn't believe Jesus came in the flesh. And so you see this first beginning of John just littered with really a lot of refuting of some of the false teaching that was out there, and what John was right away. And Paul does the same thing, right? Paul do the same thing oftentimes at the beginning of some of his letters. He'll say, I'm an apostle sent by God. He'll even in his beginning of his, he'll make a point to say by the will of God or sent by God, basically saying I'm legit. I know you're trying to come at me and you don't think my apostleship is authentic or whatever the case may be. And so that's a lot of what he's doing there. So, all right. What I want to do today, John is all about sevens. I could have talked about the 7 I Ams of Jesus. And I think before we close today, I'll touch on those, what they are. But what I wanted to go through today are the 7 signs of Jesus, the 7 miracles of Jesus in the book of John. Remember, a sign is like a stop sign. It's a post that says, hey, check this out. This is here to show you something. This is here to reveal something to you. And that's, I think, a lot of what John is wanting to do, as we'll find out the main idea later on, what John is trying to accomplish with the book of John specifically through the 7 I Ams and through the 7 signs of Jesus, is he's trying to accomplish this main idea. So we will, all right, there's 7 of you. So each of you are going to be able to read one. Phenomenal. So let's start to look at John chapter 2. And we'll each read one of the 7 signs and we'll tackle it. So Julie, you're just first on my screen. Julie, can you read chapter 2, 1 through 12? This sign number 1.
Right now, or are you listing off all of them?
No.
Just right now.
Just go for it.
Okay. On the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill those jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine and then the cheaper wine to drink, but you have saved the best till now." This, the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him.
You can stop.
Okay.
I meant 11. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. So lots here. First of all, this Jewish rite of purification. What is that all about? Anybody have any idea what they're talking about there in verse 6? All right, we'll come back to that. I want to jump back to verse 3 and 4. I really love this. I think this is really like a little bit of Jesus's humanity in this, and even like I think maybe the Father is just trying to teach us something too about honoring your. I really don't. I really believe that this really wasn't the time that Jesus was to start, but Mom like imposed her will, and Jesus looked up at his father and said, "What am I supposed to like diss my mom? Am I supposed to like not listen to Mom? Nobody doesn't listen to Mom. Come on, man." And the father kind of winked at Jesus. This is all a little speculation, but I think I'm okay. And the father winked at Jesus and said, "Yeah, we can do it. It's time." This is my own little thing there, but the power of Mom begins the first sign. So, all right, getting back to verse 6. What is this purification all about?
I don't know, but I'm just going to take a guess.
Yeah.
Is it washing the guest's feet?
Pretty close. I mean, it's probably just really basic ceremonial washing of ritual washing, probably hands, maybe feet, but just getting clean, right? Just before eating at the wedding. Sometimes it will require a washing of the hands. Sometimes it would be full immersion, so it would include feet and. But this is just a ritual washing. So here you have this idea of purification, washing your hands, getting clean. And here's this imagery of like water going to wine, right? Obviously wine, there's a symbol of blood. We know that, but think about it for a minute, right? So they're having to go and wash, right, to be a part of this. But then at some point, Jesus takes what would have been the places where they were supposed to ceremonially wash, and he turns it into wine, so there's no more water for doing that. Isn't that cool? Think about it for a minute. Why is that cool? Grace, you know why that's cool. If not, you're just like smiling like you're crazy. One of the two.
Because Jesus' blood washes us clean. So
Yes, Jesus is on the scene. He has the power to purify. If I were to sort of give a phrase to this sign, it would be power to purify. Right? It's this ironic sort of picture of Jesus taking what was supposed to be used to clean themselves before eating and feasting and turning it into wine. I love this prophetic sort of message too of saving the best for last. It was just a personal thing Jesus spoke to me one time when I was reading this passage. But right, the best wine doesn't usually come out at the end. It's the crappy wine that comes out at the end because people are pretty happy by then and don't really care, right? That's sort of the idea behind that. But here's the best wine coming out at the end. And yeah, I like to believe Jesus has saved the rest of what our lives are to be the best yet. But Jesus has the power to purify. And so this is the first sign. As you go through chapter 2, 3, and 4, this sort of purification imagery remains. You'll see, just kind of skim, we're just walking through, but right, John 3 is a real familiar refrigerator verse where Nicodemus comes on the scene, and he's a Pharisee, he's an inquisitive Pharisee, wants to find out a little bit more about who Jesus is, and Jesus says the infamous verse 16, for God so loved the world, and he goes on. But there's also this talk in verse 25 and on about more about purification. And then, of course, chapter 4, many of us are really familiar with Jesus and the woman at the well, which we're not going to look at today. But again, her issues with purity or impurity are definitely play a big role in this story in John chapter 4, and how Jesus is addressing that through words of knowledge, and for her to thirst and begin to thirst and come after him. So this purification imagery is lasting 2, 3, 4, and then we'll get into chapter 5, where we will see sign number 2. And Allie, chapter 5, 1 through 19. Oh, sorry, excuse me. 4:46. I almost forgot. 4:46 to 54 is the second sign. I jumped ahead.
Okay.
Yep, 4:46 to 54.
Once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death. Unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told them, you will never believe. The royal official said, Sir, come down before my child dies. Go, Jesus replied, your son will live. The man took Jesus at his word and departed. While he was still on the way, his servants met him with the news that his boy was living. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him. Then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. So he and his whole household believed. This was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee.
All right, so first thing we notice is, where are they? Yep, back in Cana, right? Why would that, what would be important or significant about that? Or what might be significant or important about that?
That's where he performed the first sign.
Right, and so what kind of inference or implication could you make, or if you're the original reader of what's happening right now, what's your mindset maybe as Jesus comes on the scene in Cana? Do you think word might have gotten out about what he did earlier? Yeah, so I think there might be some faith there already based on what Jesus would have done. We know that faith plays a huge part in the Gospels, and specifically in Jesus's encounters with people. There's no formula, but certainly Jesus says countless times, your faith has made you well. I have yet to see such faith as this. I mean, he makes comments and phrases like this throughout his interactions with people. And so it's unquestionable that faith plays a role in some of the miracles and things that he's doing. And so here he comes back to a place where he's already done a miracle, and it's a profound act of faith that this man shows. What's radical about his faith in this passage? How is it different than maybe some other miracles or healings you've seen or heard or read?
He believed that the word was enough, like Jesus didn't have to go with him to do it, that Jesus could just send his word, and he left right away and departed right away having believed that.
Absolutely. It's amazing. It's thinking about, he's just like, I don't think that's what he thought was like the answer maybe he was going to want. Like he probably thought Jesus should come with him. I don't think he said, hey, he's well, go ahead. You're just sort of in your mind, maybe like, okay, I'm walking now, I'm walking far, walking really far. What if nothing happens? That's going to be frustrating, right? I mean, that's sort of like, that's where he was at. Like, that's the kind of faith he had to, that's how he had to step out and believe that way, that he took him at his word, and Jesus showed the power of his word in the midst of that. I love verse 53 as well. What do you see at the end of verse 53?
the whole household believed.
Yeah, yeah. And if you've ever heard me speak or even have looked through the book of Acts, maybe we can touch on that a little bit next time, but that is really the heartbeat. It's what we saw in the first century. It's sort of what we see, how we saw the gospel spreading. And I think that's part of what sometimes we miss, specifically even America, I think sort of an individualistic sort of mindset, just a personal mindset. But it's so normal to see when someone comes to faith that like their whole house came to faith, right? And a lot of times that does happen in our in our world. I'm still working on the rest of my family, but that's definitely one of the things I think authors point out, both Luke and John in this book, is the power of the gospel. And I think for us, and for me as a campus minister, I try to keep that mindset too, that when I'm sharing the gospel with someone and someone becomes receptive to the gospel and I meet them, I want to love on them and disciple them, but I also know that then they have a network, they have a family, they're part of a team, they're part of a major, they live in a dorm, they're part of a student group, right? There's these other avenues that if they know Jesus, like that's going to be huge, and that's the mindset. Julie, you want to share what you wrote there?
I was just saying, that's what happened when Chris Manthey got saved. He went from being a drug dealer and a crazy guy to following Jesus, and his whole family, minus one brother, all got saved then because of that. So.
Yeah, when I came to the Lord, I have 6 sisters and a brother, and I wrote a long letter. It was one of those like Holy Spirit moments where I was just like sitting minding my own business, and the Lord just really compelled me to start writing this long letter. And it was like 10, 12 pages, and I think I wrote it, and like, it was just like, and things like I asking forgiveness of my dad. He'd never said he was sorry or wanted to ask for forgiveness, but I just knew that I needed to say it's okay, or I forgive you, I should say, is what I want to say. That I was forgiving my dad, even though he hadn't even asked for forgiveness. And just God had just showed me just different things, and because of that, a handful of my family members now do know the Lord. But yeah, I every time I see that, I'm mindful of that, and want to be thinking that way. So, all right, now chapter 5. Grace 5:1 to 19.
All right. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which is Aramaic is called Bethsaida, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for so long a time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God.
You can stop there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so here's this pool. There's even, my verse 4 talks about an angel would come down, and then whoever could, when the water got troubled, the first person would jump in this water. That it sounds like there was some healings going on, and there was some expectations of things to happen. We also know in verse 5 that this wasn't just somebody who just recently got hurt, but this is somebody who'd been sick for 38 years, right? I think you'll see even to the end of these signs, like there's unique things about these signs. In some of the cases, there's things they've never seen before. There's things that Jesus is doing that have never been done before, and that's the point. The point is to show that this is Jesus, and he is the only one that can do these things and has done these things. So I really love this passage because one of the biggest revelations I ever received was from this passage. Here's this group in verse 3. It says there's a multitude of all these sick, paralyzed, invalid. And I remember asking one time I was reading this passage, man, Jesus, it looks like a prime opportunity for you to just like reveal yourself and have a revival, right? Like here's this multitude of sick people and you have a crowd, like you have the stage, like do your thing, right? Like do your thing. And I remember asking the Lord one time I was reading this passage. I said, this just would have been a great opportunity. I didn't understand this at the time when I was asking this. And I felt like the Lord said, I want you to keep reading this passage. And I got down to verse 19. That's why I had Grace stop at 18. And now read verse 19, Grace.
Jesus gave them this answer. Very truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does.
Yeah. In verse 30, it also says, I can do nothing on my own authority. As I hear, I judge. So here's this picture of, I had this aha moment where I read verse 19 and I go, oh, I get it. I get it. Jesus just healed the one person because that's what he saw the Father doing. Like that's what the Father was whispering to him. That's in some way, shape, or form, whether it was his heart beating fast or he got a picture of this man or his eyes were fixed on this guy in the crowd, right? Maybe you can even share your own story about something similar to this, where you just knew the Father was up to something in a situation that you were in, and you just needed to partner with him. And again, this is Jesus showing us, modeling for us, living by the Spirit of God, going where he's supposed to go, doing what he's supposed to do, even when to some people it might not make any sense. Why are you talking to a Samaritan? Why are you talking to a Samaritan woman? Why, in the midst of a multitude of sick, when you're trying to reveal who you are to people, would you just choose to heal one person? Doesn't make any sense. Except for the fact he's only doing what he sees the Father doing, right? I think of the passage in the book of Acts when Peter and James and John are headed to pray, and there's this sick man off to the side, and they could have just went to pray and they could have just kind of did their thing, but there was something where they sensed that God was up to something, and he wanted to partner with. They needed to partner with him, and silver and gold have I none, right? Man gets healed that day. I know for me, it's sometimes I might even have a picture in my mind of seeing myself doing something, like maybe like even minutes before something this scenario is played out in reality. I don't know if you can relate to that at all. Sometimes I've been walking on campus and I could just see myself doing something or talking to somebody or praying for somebody, and then literally like shortly after that moment plays itself out. I think that's one of the ways I think God tries to get my attention and teaches me how to be led by the Spirit and to do what the Father is doing, or to be about the Father's business. I don't know if anybody else has a quick example of sort of what it looks like for you to sort of live a life doing what the Father's doing and try to abide and live that way. If not, that's fine. I just, because I think that's,
I had a different question.
yeah.
I don't want to, I just kind of want to check my understanding. So, the sheep gate. So I'm like remembering with like talking with John Murphy and looking at Nehemiah,
Yeah.
how they rebuild the gates or whatever, and that symbolism for each gate. Is the symbolism for sheep gate like forgiveness?
I don't know. I'd have
Because
to.
I think okay, because what I'm remembering is walking through Nehemiah, because this is one of John Murphy's favorite passages. Nehemiah is
Yeah.
like basically gets destroyed, and then they rebuild the walls of Jerusalem in a
Sure.
certain order. So I'm fairly certain that the sheep gate was like representative of forgiveness, because that's where the sheep came in, and so the sheep would come in to be sacrificed. And
Yeah.
so the imagery of sacrifice and the imagery of like forgiveness. And then it's also interesting how afterward Jesus found him in the temple and said, "See, you are well, sin no more, that
Yeah.
nothing worse may happen to you." And it's kind of just like, it's just something I was wondering, because it's kind of cool to like see how forgiveness and healing are like working in tandem.
I like that. Hey, can I put you on the homework to find out about the sheep gate for me?
You got it.
All right. We got to report back about the sheep gate. I like that. All right. All right. So that's 3. Chapter 6.
Real quick on this one. I have my study Bible out, and it talks about how like he's like, I don't even know who the man was, so it's not like the guy even had faith in Jesus.
Yeah.
But he trusted him at his word. So just this is an example of them proving like you don't have to have faith in Jesus, and you don't have to stir up a ton of faith to be able to be healed. You just have to believe what he says.
Right. Yeah, and that's that. I love that. There's never like a situation where it's like Jesus does the same thing every single time, and everything plays out exactly the same. Yeah, I love that. All right, chapter 6. Feeding of the 5,000. I think for time's sake, I don't want to skip it, but I just want to maybe not read the whole thing out loud, but a couple things I just want to point out as you're there, as you're on John 6. And this is the only miracle recorded in all the Gospels. I think that's a really cool thing. I think that's an important thing to know, and I think that shows how important this passage of Scripture really is, how meaningful it is. I love the great teacher move that Jesus does in verse 5 and 6. You know, where he's like, how are we to buy bread? He doesn't know. You know, it's this idea, you know, Jesus is sort of holding off, like knowing that he knows what he can do, but he's sort of like waiting for the disciples. He wants to see their response. He wants to see how they're gonna respond to there being no food, and how are they gonna react? I think we've heard the faith of the boy passage. We've heard that over and over again, but it never gets old. The example of the faith of a boy, just simply being able to offer what he has, but more so thinking that his little bit mattered. Right? I think that's the key. He didn't stop to think that the amount that he had was insignificant. He thought without a shadow of a doubt that the amount he had mattered. Like, I got this, how much, this is what I got. He wasn't thinking, man, I only got this much, which is something we probably might have done as an adult. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the child in this passage, the young boy, right? So Jesus is showing a power to purify, right? In the second and third, he's showing his power over words, sort of like a Genesis moment where he speaks something into existence. And in this miracle, there's this power to provide, right? This power to provide. Jesus is it's a tangible, practical miracle that people needed to eat, right? And he met needs. He met a need in this particular situation. It's a minor detail, but I think it's still cool. Verse 12, this stewardship thing, right? They collect the extra food. And then, of course, more than enough, right? It wasn't just like the last fish that Jesus multiplied, fed the last person, right? I love that. It just shows God's economy and the abundance of God. All right, so that's 4. And then sign 5. Who are we on? Matthew 6:15-21. The shorter one.
6:15-21. All right. Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountains by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going.
All right. So now Jesus has power over nature. John is showing all these different aspects of who Jesus is and all of his power. When I think of this passage and him walking on water and power over nature, it makes me think of Colossians 1, which is often called the Christology passage. And I'm just going to read it really quick. It's about 4 or 5 verses, but it's Colossians 1:15-20. Colossians 1:15-20. This is Paul talking about Jesus. It says, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. He's the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross." So that's who he is. And he's building. And now we'll get into the last 2 signs.
John got back to me about Sheepgate. He's quick.
Did he?
Yeah. It's repentance, actually.
Okay.
So it's quite similar idea, though. When he goes like, "Don't sin no more," like that repentance act.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
There's a little tidbit for you.
There you go. Hey, we're all learning, man. Thank you. All right. The 6th sign is chapter 9. Chapter 9. Braden, would you read? Do 9.
Yeah, what verses?
Yep, let's do 9, 1-12.
As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with mud and said to him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, Is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, It is he. Others said, No, but he is like him. He kept saying, I am the man. So they said to him, Then how were your eyes open? He answered, The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, Where is he? He said, I don't know.
All right, we can stop there. So verse 2, they ask a question, right? What do they ask again?
Who sinned that he was born
Right.
blind?
Right, who sinned? So I think probably where they're getting that from is Exodus 34:7, sort of this generational idea that was, we saw in Exodus. And I'll just read Exodus 34:6 and 7. It says, The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. Okay, so this idea might have been part of their mentality. Also, the Pharisees had their own sort of legalistic mindset where, nothing bad can, if you follow the law, if you follow the Torah, then, everything's going to be right? Bad stuff wouldn't happen to you. That sort of thinking and mindset creeped into Pharisaical teaching as well. And so you have this idea of them thinking that, okay, well, something must be wrong with them. What's significant about this? Jesus has healed blind people before. What's different about this one? Anybody know?
Is it his method?
Definitely. That's definitely. I love this passage because when I'm talking about prophetic ministry or prophetic evangelism, and we're talking about sort of, from what you see the prophets doing in the Old Testament, what God made them do, to some of the things that we see Jesus do in healing. Sometimes it's often shocking to me how skeptical we often are about what God might be doing, or if God is up to something. Our first reaction is probably not, oh man, that's really cool what I hear happening down there. It's probably more so like, I don't know if that's, and again, don't get me wrong, like we should test the spirits, right? We're not supposed to be gullible and naive. But if you start taking a list of weird things that you see in the Bible, you'd have to rip out a lot of pages. You'd have to rip out a whole lot of pages to be able to just, so any case, that's just a side note. But verse 1, it says that he was blind from birth. And I think that's a unique thing. And this makes it a little, again, this is something that's never been done before. We've never seen this before. In fact, in verse 32, it actually says that. Verse 32, it says, "Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind." Chapter 9, verse 32. So Jesus is doing things that have never been seen before. No one's ever done before. And I cut this passage off a little short, but I mean, you go on and read it, and it's just this interaction with the Pharisees, and they're like, "Oh, I don't believe you, and this didn't really happen," and then this back and forth, and then he begins to preach to them, and they get mad at him, like, "Who are you? Some scum trying to talk to us, trying to teach us something?" And he's like, "I don't know. All I know is I couldn't see, and now I see. That's all I know." And that's basically what he says. So it's a fun second part of that passage. But all right, I can see we're running short on time.
Wait,
so,
what do you call this one? Power what?
Oh, power over sight. Really exciting. Sorry, maybe I got had a lack of creativity on that one, Julie. Sorry. All right, the seventh sign, the crescendo, is chapter 11. So let's just read a little bit of it because I want to honor your time. All right, let's read. Let's just try to read 1 to 27. I think we can do it. We'll just read it. We do it? Grace, you want to read 1 to 27, chapter 11? You got this.
Sure. Okay.
All right.
11, 1 to 27?
1 to 27, chapter 11.
Okay. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "The sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this light's world. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him."
Stop there. Kylie, will you read 17 to 27? I actually looked at Kylie and said Grace.
Okay.
Yes, okay. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been there, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world."
Vincent, can you
27.
read 28 to 37?
Which one?
Verse 28 to actually 28 to 44. Let's just get that far.
Okay. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "As the teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, She got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take out the grave clothes and let him go."
Thanks, Vincent. Power over death, right? The crescendo. My pastor says it. I love how he says it. He said Jesus had to say, "Lazarus, come out," or they would all, or the whole bunch of dead bodies would have started coming out. Isn't that awesome? I love that. I love that. You say, well, why is he doing this? Why is he going through all these different signs, taking us through all these different miracles? Well, I think it's to get to John 20:31, which I think is a key verse. I'll read John 20:30 and 31. It says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing in him you may have life in his name." I think the main idea of this book is that Jesus is God. He's the Son of God, but he's God, right? It starts in verse 1, chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning, this Genesis moment, right? This Genesis imagery of in the beginning, how the book of John starts. And we see these 7 signs crescendoing and raising Lazarus from the dead, so that the original audience could understand, like, this is who Jesus is. He's the Son of God. He is God. Really quick, and you can look these up too, but the 7 I Ams, we didn't talk about those, but you'll see, I am the bread, I am the light of the world, which is chapter 8. In chapter 10, you see I am the good shepherd, and I am the gate. He talks about how we can hear his voice and be led by him. In chapter 11, the Lazarus passage right there, he says, "I am the resurrection and the life." In John chapter 14, verse 6, he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And then in John 15, "I am the true vine." That's the abiding passage. So those are the 7 I ams, and I encourage you to look at those as well, and just to meditate on what does that mean. I mean, even when I think of the phrase "I am," it's sort of like the answer, right? It's like when you ask a question and then you answer is "I am." That's sort of what I think about. Makes me think about who Jesus is. He is I am, and these 7 signs as well. So. Any final thoughts, questions? I know we kind of had to speed up a little bit towards the end to get through the 7 signs, but didn't really get a chance to talk too much about application tonight. But I mean, I think that's the big picture. I think there's definitely a purpose is also to deal with some of the false teaching, but the primary message is Jesus is God. So, yeah, awesome. Well, let me pray for you guys. Thanks for coming tonight. Lord, thank you for the book of John. God, thank you that we have just these books to show us, even so long ago, how you were moving and how eyewitnesses to what you were doing, people like John, were able to come and follow you and then preach the message and refute false teaching and record and share some of the wonderful things and amazing things you did to reveal yourself to so many. And God, we're still doing that today. We still want to see that happen today. We still want to proclaim that you are God. We want to move in your power. We want to see you move. We understand that even in the midst of our lives and what's going on in our world today, that you are the I am. You are the answer. You're the answer to all the things that we don't understand. So that's what we hold firm to you because of that. Thank you for your word.